So one of the things that sets Revit apart from generic 3D modeling programs, of course, is the ability to use that model to generate some drawings or some sheet views. Title blocks then are a really big part of that, and we're going to look in this video about how to set up a title block. It'll be like the one that you see on screen here, and of course, it's not just framing the view or the drawing, but it's also providing some crucial information. And we'll look at how Revit allows you to set up not only the static elements like the lines, the framework, and the static text, like you can see here, but also the elements that update or that are dynamic and take advantage of Revit's parametric abilities. So to do this, we're going to start with a template, and I'm going to go to File, New, and create a title block. So there's a special section here for that. And then I'm going to navigate in my library to my family templates and then go into English for language and then just go to title blocks. And I want to choose the new size metric. So this is going to be a little bit confusing. I'm going to be kind of crossing between different units here, doing a little bit of imperial and a little bit of metric, because I want to create an ANSID sized sheet. So I'm going to actually choose, somewhat counterintuitively, to start with a metric template. And then I'm just going to make some adaptation here so I can create that ANSID sheet. Now, let me explain why I'm going to use that sheet size. So this represents the proportions of an ANSID sheet. And you can see here that it's basically meant to be the expansion of the 8.5 by 11 or letter size sheet module. That being the case, it's a really good size to use when you want to take your larger sheet, your full-size ANSID sheet, and print it at a smaller size like an 11 by 17 or even an 8.5 by 11. So the module is consistent and you'll get proper proportions when you want to print the larger sheet on a smaller piece of paper. In addition to that, of all the standard sized large sheets, ANSID is actually set up nicely for matching to a monitor. So this graphic here represents the proportions of an A0 or A1 size sheet, which arguably are much more common. But you can see here that with an ANSID, the proportions are a little bit more stretched out horizontally. And that means that if I need to adapt my sheet for presenting on a screen, as I might have to do if I'm presenting remotely, let's say, the ANSID is a little bit better because it allows you to use up what would otherwise be some empty regions here on the left and the right. So ANSID is based in imperial units. It's meant to be a 22-inch by 34-inch, and you can see here that I've got the adapted millimeters. So I'm just going to make that conversion in the template file and start setting up an ANSID in a metric file. Now, keep in mind that when I do this, all of the units that I use, of course, everything that I describe, it's all something that you can adapt. And all the steps that I describe are suitable for any size sheet that you use. So this isn't specifically about creating just an ANSID size sheet template or title block. These can be adapted for whatever size sheet you want to use. So keep that in mind. And as I said, I started off with a really generic template here. And I'm actually just going to scrub everything that's already there. That was actually just a letter size sheet that was shown there. And I'm going to expand the size of it here so that I've got a 559 millimeter height. And then I'm going to change the width so that instead of 297, I've got 864 millimeters. Okay, so that's how this all begins. Those are the metric equivalent dimensions of an ANSID sheet. And the first thing that I want to do is just to create that little border region. And anytime I want to create new line work for this title block, I just go to the Create tab and just use the regular line tool. Now, there is the option of customizing the line types, but for a title block, I'm really not worried about that. I'm not going to get into anything elaborate with line types or line weights or anything like that. I'm just going to use the default thin black line style. Now, the first thing I want to do is create that sort of inner border. And to generate that, I'm just going to use the draw panel here and select pick lines, and then I'm just going to set an offset of 12 millimeters. And then I'll just hover over the exterior border line and then just kind of go to the inside and make sure that I get that 12 millimeter border and clean it up here just to create a more finished look, just using the trim extend corner tool. And that's how the whole process begins. Now, over on the right here, to create that section where I'm going to have my little text boxes, my boxes of information, I'm just going to take that existing line and then just copy over to the left another line, 75 millimeters. And you can already see here that I've got the basic look or the format here of my title block. Now, in order to kind of keep this video a little bit shorter, I'm not going to go through the process of making every single line. I do have this image here just to kind of illustrate what I've done with the line work, and then I'll come back to this as well when I start talking about adding some of the text elements. So what I'll do here is I'll just kind of zoom in and just show you where I'm going to be placing these additional lines to create these individual little sections here for different types of text. So what I've got over here in the red is an indication of the dimensions for each of these sections, and I've given those units in imperial and in metric. So I'm creating 9 text box sections. That requires, of course, that I add 8 lines, and you can see the first line was 65 millimeters below, and then 80, and then 55, followed by 60, 90, 70, 43, 32, and 40 millimeters. So I just wanted to call that out quickly. If you need to review those and kind of go back at your own pace, I'll leave you to do that. As I said, I didn't want to go through the process of doing every little line, just it would take up too much time in the video. So once you've got that done, then of course you'll have the essential sort of framework or the visible lines that you need for the title block. The next step then is to add the static text. And you'll find this again on the Create tab over here on the left, and then we're just using the text tool to create this. So what you can see here in my graphic is that I've got all of the static text described with this blue text, and all of it, as I said, is a 2 millimeter type. So the first step in this process is to just activate the text tool and then create the 2 millimeter type style that you need. So you might be starting off with something like 3 millimeter, whatever it might be. You want to just click on Edit Type and then make a duplicate. And you'll want to just call this, of course, your 2 millimeter text. All right, and I have to add that little bit of extra text because I've already actually got a 2 millimeter text type in here. So create the proper name, and then I would switch the background type to transparent and choose the font that you like, and then set your text size. Now, this is where it gets a little bit confusing, admittedly. As you recall, I kind of started this process with something that involved some imperial units, and I'm kind of going back and forth between metric and imperial. So when you enter your text size, you might see it listed here in inches, but you can just enter 2 mm, and it'll make the adaptation here, and you're good to go. So I have 2 millimeter text type. I've chosen my proper font, specified that it's transparent, and then I've also just set the size, which was 2 millimeters, and then it translates into 5/64ths of an inch. So I'll click OK, and now it's waiting for me to place that text. And I would then place that text in the upper left, as I said, 1 click, and you're good to go. And then you can type in whatever the text might be. And as I said, this is going to be static text. This is not going to update. So regardless of what happens back in the project that you export this to, you're always just going to see that exact text. It doesn't change. So to populate the rest of these fields here, you would just grab that little bit of 2 millimeter text and just use your standard copy tool. And you can snap to, let's say, the upper frame corner. And then as you make your way down to each of these sections, you'll be able to kind of place that static text in exactly the same spot. So once again, just to kind of speed this up, I'm going to just slowly pan from top to bottom here so that you can see in large blue text the actual text that I'll be entering there, and then a prompt here about the size of it. They're all 2 millimeters, as I said. And then once we're done that, we'll get into the labels. So just from top to bottom, the second from the top section is for consultants, and then for general notes. And then we have a section here for professional seals. There's no label needed here for our revision schedule because we're just going to add that later. And you can see that it's got its own title. So below that, we've got our project, and then we've got some static text describing client. Below that, sheet name. And then things get a little smaller here for this second from the bottom window where we have a section for drawn by checked by date, those three things. And then right at the bottom, we've got some static text here to describe the sheet number. Okay, so pause and rewind as you need to populate those text boxes with the static text or the regular text. And now we're going to move on to the more complex part of this, which is adding the labels. So the labels are dynamic. They're not necessarily called that in Revit, but they are dynamic in the sense that the information within them can be changed. And as I mentioned before, a lot of it is actually automatically updated. So the way that labels work is we go back to the Create tab and we click here on the label tool. And initially it's the same process as the static text. So we'll just click to activate the tool, and you'll see over here in the properties window that we have different types of labels based on their size. So what I'm going to be doing is creating several different sizes, as you can see from the purple text here in the bottom right. An 8mm, a 6mm, and a 3mm, and then I've also got one down at the bottom here that's a little bit larger at 12 for the sheet number. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to create these different types, and the process is exactly the same as it was for the static text. Just choose one to get going, click Edit Type, and then you can make duplicates. And you can see here that I've got, as I said, a 3, and I've got a 6 and an 8 and a 12mm. And I've used the same font for most of them. You can see here that I've just selected the same font. Again, the text size will be displayed in metric or in imperial here, but just enter the metric equivalent or the, whatever it might be, 6mm, 8mm, and it'll make the adaptation here. I did go for a different font for the bottom. Again, that's just personal preference. I wanted something that would be a little bit more bold. And then as for the other ones, I like to use the Swiss 721 LTCNBT because it's a condensed font. You can see here that it's a little bit more sort of vertically oriented, so it takes up a little less space. And when this thing starts to get populated with all of your project text, you can kind of appreciate that a more condensed font might be a better way of squeezing a lot of information in. Okay, so the process of creating the label then is much the same. You would create your initial text, and I'll maybe just repeat the process here for this first one. So I'm going to just delete that one and then kind of walk you through the process of creating a label for that. So again, Create tab, click on the Label tool, and this one I know I want an 8mm label, so I'm just going to click to place it. And this is where it's different from the static text. When you place that initially, you'll get this window here that just provides some information about editing the label. Now, for all of these fields that we want, you can see that there is a matching bit of text here on the left. So for example, where we want client name, we just scroll down, and there we see client name, and we just click on this little green arrow to send it over to the right, and this is now what will be populated in that label. So we'll click OK, and you can see now that it displays client name, and that's just kind of the default value. So if we don't enter anything else back in the RVT environment, in the project environment, it'll just display client name. But once we do enter it, then on every other subsequent sheet, it would know what to populate this particular label with. So when you click on that little bit of text, remember this is a label and not static text, but when you click on it, what you'll see over here in the properties window is that you have the ability to not only edit the type, which is what would control the size and the font, but you also have the ability here to edit the label. So just be aware of that distinction. If I click on Edit Label, you'll see that same window pop up again. And this is where, for example, I could change the sample value. So this is just the default. If I had wanted to have a different bit of text appear there, I could make that change. Otherwise, I'm just going to kind of leave this as it is. So I'll click OK, and that's ready to go. And then I'll just repeat the process for all of these other labels. So down below you here, you can see that I've got client. Whoops, I chose the wrong one here. Let me fix that. All right, so good opportunity here just to show you how to make an edit. So this was supposed to be project name, and I left client name there. So that's all right. If you need to fix it, that's why this edit button exists here in the properties window. You can just click there, and we'll click on client name, and we're going to click on the red arrow here to send it back. And then we're going to look for project name, which is the proper label that we want to have here. So click on project name, click OK, and there we go. You can see here that we've got a little grip on the right side. And if we want to kind of have this more properly oriented and stretched out a little bit to the right, all we have to do is drag that grip, and you'll see that the text kind of wraps, the wrapping of the text adjusts automatically. So repeat that process for project name at 8 millimeters, client name a little bit smaller at 6. Then we've got our sheet name at 8 millimeters again. And then we've got this crowded little window down at the bottom here where we list the drawn by, the checked by, and the date as well. Now, the size, is something that you can choose. It's a personal preference. There's no reason to believe that this is exactly what you need to do on every single title block. So just feel free to kind of make modifications and change the look of this as you like. Generally speaking, you'll see that the names of each of these little text boxes will be fairly consistent, but again, you'll go from office to office and see that there's a lot of variation in that. Right at the bottom, as I said, I did a slightly different label. This one is a little bit larger and it's got a slightly bolder font. That's just because as you're flipping between printed sheets, it's nice to be able to see at a glance that really nice bold sheet number as you're making your way between the set of sheets, which is often going to be 50 or maybe 100 different sheets. So it's nice to be able to see that at a glance quite quickly. Okay, so that's a quick breakdown on the labels. Actually, I'll mention this one last one over here. On the outer left edge of my frame, you can see that I've added one more label, and this is the file path. So a really good reference for people that work in your office. They'll want to see exactly where this particular Revit file was located on the network, and that's what will be displayed here. And as I said, it updates automatically. It's not something that you have to manually populate, and that was a 3 millimeter label. Okay, so there's the essential contents of our title block sheet. I'll add just maybe a couple other little notes here. In the upper left, what I did here in my kind of branding section is I just added a logo, and that can be done by just clicking on the Insert tab. And depending on what the format of your logo is, you can import an image or CAD formats or PDF. There's a few different options here. So this was just something that was generated in Illustrator. I made a PDF of it, and then I imported it as a PDF, and I was able to size it and make it take up the exact amount of space that I wanted to here in the upper right. I'm going to get rid of this little bit of static text as well. Okay, so I displayed some dimensions and some prompts here just so you could kind of see exactly what it was that I populated the sheet with. The last thing that I'm going to do here before I do a final save and then take it into the RVT environment and test out how it worked is I'm going to add a revision schedule, just like the one that you can see here. I'm going to delete this one just so I can kind of walk you through the process again. The way that this works is you just go to your View tab, and you'll see here that there is an option, a special tool here for creating a revision schedule. So I'm going to click on that, and you'll see here that it takes me right into the typical sort of schedule creating tabs here. So I've got one for fields, sorting, formatting, and appearance. And for fields, it makes the assumption here that I want to see these 4 things. I'm going to edit this and make it just a little bit shorter than that. So I want to see revision number, description, and then date. So I'm just going to click on revision sequence and send it back over to the left. And if you were really particular about the order, remember that you can click on each one of these little bits of text here over on the right and shuffle their order as you like. I'm going to leave it as it is. So I want to have revision number displayed first, and then the description, and then the date. And now that I've done that, I'm going to slide over here to the right and make some edits on the sorting grouping tab. I want this to be sorted by revision number, and I want it to be ascending. And then I want to make sure that itemize every instance is checked. It should be there by default. Next, I'll have formatting. And all this does, as the title suggests, is it's just going to allow me to kind of refine exactly how this information is laid out. So for each of the fields, you've got the option here to change the heading, the orientation, and the alignment. And I'm not going to make any adjustments to this. It seems to be exactly as I want it to be. So I'll just go with the defaults, and then I'm just going to go over to the Appearance tab and make some final edits. I want it to be built, again, according to defaults here, top down. It's just going to give me some default line work here for arranging the appearance. The height, I'm going to change. This is the one subtle thing I want to change. I want to make this a user-defined height, and you'll see that that adds a grip at the bottom that I can change the height of this, this revision schedule with. And then I'm also going to make some different schedule text here, and I created a 2 millimeter text type. So I'm going to populate each of these with 2 millimeter text, although with the title text maybe a little bit larger. I'll go with a 3 millimeter for that. Okay, everything else is just by default, so I'm going to click OK. And you'll see that when I do that, it takes me right to that revision view. the schedule view. And what I want to do now is go back to the view here of the title block, which was this one right here. And then, of course, all I have to do is just look in my project browser, select the revision schedule, and then just drag it onto my title block. And you can see here that I get these grips, these little blue triangle grips, and then the blue circle dot at the bottom. And I can just kind of drag these around just so that they fill in that little text section, that little text box nicely. And I'm left with something that looks like that. So that should do. Now, what's going to happen is when I import this into an RVT file, I'll be able to go to the revision tool, and I'll be able to determine what text is inserted into each of these columns here in these rows. So that's my completed work there. Now, you won't have all this extra text in these dimensions, of course, so you won't have to do this next step. But in order to prepare this for import, I would delete all of that. And after having done that, I'm going to get something that looks, let me just get rid of this one. I'm going to get something that looks like this, of course. So I'll just have the framework, the lines, and then of course I'll have my logo, my static text, my labels, and my revision schedule. And as you would expect, I'll do a quick file save as. This is going to be a family file. Of course, notice how project is grayed out. So this is going to be an RFA file. And I'm just going to quickly give this a name. And once that's saved, I'll be able to load it into my project, and it'll look for an RVT project, of course, so I'll just choose one that I have open. And I'm just going to go to this view here, and of course I've already got this on my sheet view, so I'm just going to click it, and then I'll just delete that, and we'll just focus on what's already been built. So here's the finished product. As I said, you can see here that based on the information that's already in the project, it's already populated certain fields. So it knows the project, it knows the client, and it knows that this particular sheet view is a roof plan. And you can see here's an example of how this is updating constantly. If I zoom in and out, you can see the seconds change on the date stamp. So again, just kind of verifying that it is working, it's live. And then I've already on previous sheets entered the drawed by and the checked by, and then it's automatically picking up on the sheet number and on the location here, of course, of the file. So if this is the first time that you've placed the sheet in the project, some of these won't be populated. You'll just see the default values. If you need to edit them, all you have to do is just click on the title block, and then over here in the properties window, you'll see that you have the option here for just manually changing some of these settings. And once you do that, again, if it's your first title block in the project, you can, for example, with the sheet number, enter that information, and then on subsequent sheets, it'll just kind of pick up on the sequence, and it'll automatically sort of anticipate what the number for the next sheet would be. It'll repeat things like your drawn by, your initials, and checked by, and it'll also kind of pick up on some of these other things that it knows, you know, the logic of. So a really good example of how you can create some nice automated text for your title block and create that really nice framework, of course, which just kind of gives it that professional finished look. Okay, thanks very much for watching. Hope that helps. Post comments below. And if you like what you see, please consider subscribing. We'll catch you in the next video.